Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's topic, we are talking about the autonomy mindset, taking control for a stronger self. Now, to me, this is a particularly interesting topic in this day and age. And I think our guest today will help us to fully uncover the mystery behind the autonomy mindset. I think not a lot of us have heard about this before. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Napper to our virtual studio. I have to say, I really appreciate Paul's time because he's on vacation and he's agreed to do this. And he said it's fun. It's not actually work. So, this is how I know this conversation is going to be great. And so by way of introduction, Dr. Paul Napper is a psychologist focusing on human performance. He is also an author and a leadership expert. He works with business leaders, helping them to be more effective in leading organizations. And he co-wrote a book on human agency titled The Power of Agency, which is perfect for today's topic. So I'm curious to learn more about this. And thank you for joining us today, Paul. I would love to introduce you and get you to share a bit more of your professional journey with our audience. How did you get here, and why did you choose this topic to be, sort of your expertise area? How did you know that this is your calling, let's say?
Well, it's a great question. I started out working on Wall Street after college in the financial business. So learned a lot about business and felt in some ways like all my needs weren't being met. I was very interested in people and how people make decisions, how people take action, how people work with other people to make a positive difference in the world. So I decided I really wanted to go deeper on that and went back to graduate school in psychology, got a doctorate in psychology. When I finished my degree, I started looking at consulting firms that did work with business leaders in organizations and got hired immediately by a firm in Boston, Massachusetts. And never looked back. So I've been doing this kind of leadership development, coaching work for the past 20 years almost now. And along the way, wrote a book with another psychologist, a fellow psychologist. We're very interested in the topic of agency. Agency is the sort of power we have as human beings to create lives according to our interests and our values. So it really is the power that resides within us that allows us to think and make the kinds of choices in our lives that create the lives that are most meaningful to us. So we were really interested in this topic as psychologists. Obviously, it's something that every human being can relate to. And so that's kind of how I got here. And I was so happy, Lou, when I heard from you and get an opportunity to address your audience. In Australia. It's really quite an honor to be here today speaking with you.
Thank you. And yeah, I have to say we have colleagues all over the world as well, not just in Australia.
Nice.
So,
nice.
Our colleagues are our first and foremost audience, and we also have a pretty global audience too. So I think this
I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So this is a pretty universal topic, so it's not just something that we only learn in, let's say, we only talk about it in Australia and in the country. It's not that. I think maybe the cultural nuances might dictate that it's a bit different here and there in terms of how we approach agency or the autonomy mindset. But overall, I think it's a pretty universal topic. Everyone can relate to this.
Absolutely. Every human being has has agency, and sometimes it's easier for them to access that, and sometimes it's not so easy for them to access their full agency. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very big word, but also very interesting concept to learn more about. Before we do that, we'll get to know you a bit better, and we have this section called "Have You Met Paul?" I'll get you to just say a few words, share some recommendations, just the first thing that pops into your mind when I ask you these questions. So the first question is about book. What is a book you would recommend?
Well, that's a really that's a really loaded question. I would obviously recommend the book I wrote, but
Yeah.
aside from that, I'm actually reading two authors at the current moment. One is Joan Didion, who's an American author. Joan Didion recently died. She is really, in some ways, famous for being a myth buster. She kind of probes very deeply, analyzes anything she focuses on, and kind of explodes various myths. So she's an American author, quite good. And then I'm reading a completely different person named Jonathan Ames. Jonathan Ames is someone actually I crossed paths with back in my school days, and he's been on a tear writing a lot of different books in different genres. He's recently started writing detective novels, which are really outstanding. And I found myself, as a psychologist, drawn to detective novels, sort of mystery detective novels, because I really like to see how people perform under pressure and how they figure things out. And really good mystery novels, detective novels, they really explore that in a deeper way, in an interesting way. Always, interesting stories. So anyways, I'm reading Jonathan Ames' recent detective novel, and I'm also on a more serious note reading Joan Didion's a number of her books. So that's what's on my bookshelf right now.
Yeah. Well, I asked for one recommendation and you gave us two, so that's great. I think it's kind of like branching out between fiction and nonfiction in a way.
Absolutely. I like both. I learned a lot from both.
Exactly. It's really fun too, to kind of switch in between. Sometimes I find that just reading nonfiction all the time can be a little bit tiring, especially when, if you really care about personal development, you read a lot on that topic and then you're kind of like, oh, maybe a little break from that might be fun. And it kind of sparks the love of reading again. So that's what I've heard from a lot of people.
Absolutely. And, really important point. The thing about fiction is it takes you out of yourself, right? And so a lot of times when you're reading nonfiction, you're learning something and you're thinking about how that applies to yourself. But when you read fiction, you're entering into somebody's world, somebody else's world, and maybe a different culture, and it's expansive in a different way than nonfiction. So good point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So next question. I wouldn't be surprised if you kind of do the same thing when you recommend a movie to us.
Yeah, first of all, I'm a huge movie fan. I see a lot of movies, and I recently saw Oppenheimer, which is making the rounds, and also Barbie, which is also making the rounds. And I would recommend both of them. Particularly Barbie, strangely enough. Oppenheimer sounds like the more serious of the two, but Barbie has some really interesting kind of cultural critiques that are very subtly worked in. That anyways, everybody's talking about it. So and Oppenheimer is one criticism of the movie, slight criticism of the movie, is they really over dramatize everything so much in the movie that it's a little bit distracting. But anyway, for a lot of people, I think they'll be engrossed by it and learn a lot by it. So I would recommend both of them.
Yeah, thank you. I think that comes as no surprise, but at the same time, it's still important to talk about because, my colleagues and I talk about it all the time. My friends and I talk about it all the time. It's been, happening the past few months. But I agree. Barbie has been really interesting because I did not expect walking into the cinema learning that much about this world, or just getting a reminder of what is important. And in fact, I actually, before I saw the movie, I saw the quote that the mother was saying in the movie, and I didn't know where it was coming from. And I was just kind of like, whoa, this is so true. And it's hitting home really hard, especially for women. They can relate with this. And I went into the cinema and I heard her say that. I was like, whoa, so that came from this movie? I did not expect that. Did not see that coming at all. That's really cool.
Well, what's interesting about Barbie, too, is it relates to our topic today, Lu. It relates to autonomy and agency and,
yes,
right? And obviously to women and the traditional roles of women versus, who women really are and what they really want out of life. And so anyways, it's very much related to, I would say Barbie in of the two movies, Oppenheimer and Barbie, I think Barbie is even more to the point of of the discussion you and I are going to have today.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. All my friends recommend Barbie, and they're kind of like, just don't go see Oppenheimer, just see Barbie. That's all. That's all that's worth it. So I followed that advice. But yeah, I agree with you, and not just Barbie, by the way. I think one important thing to point out is even Ken in that movie. That narrative and that story of Ken is also really related to the topic. And maybe when we get to the questions, we can make the reference. But the next question in this part is about a podcast. So you're obviously our guest today, but I wonder which podcast you would recommend to our audience.
I really like a podcast by a guy named Chris Hayes here in the US. His podcast is called Why Is This Happening? Mm-hmm. And he just takes a current event and dives deeply into that event. Usually it's a newsworthy event. And he asks the question, why is this happening? And I've been increasingly using that expression because I think for all of us in the world today, which, becomes more complex, by the minute, sometimes we really benefit from pausing and reflecting on that question. Why is this happening? Yeah. And so I love, he's really refreshing. And, that's one podcast I really enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll put that on my to listen list. Thank you for that. Now, next question is about your role model. If you don't have a famous role model, I would love to know if you have a personal role model, or you can recommend both.
I do have a famous one in mind. It's a former U.S. president, Abraham Lincoln, and I think about him a lot as a leader because he had such an incredibly challenging. He was leading the United States during a particularly challenging period in history, when actually a civil war was going on in the country, which is, from today's perspective, it's really almost impossible to imagine the country you're living in going through a civil war where you have, people shooting at each other. But I think a lot about how he found the resiliency and the ability to bring the country together. Mm-hmm. And so he is someone I think is really worthy of reading more about, how did he do that? And what was he like? I mean, he was obviously a person with a very high level of agency. And, he listened to a wide range of people. He didn't play politics so much. He really kind of listened to both sides. And he had a very clear sort of way of operating as a leader. So he's probably, the person I would cite as my most famous role model.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And final question in this part, what is a course you've completed that left a really strong impact on you?
When I was an undergraduate in college, I actually, I minored in Russian affairs, and I took Russian history, I took Russian literature courses. And as the war with the Ukraine has been occurring, I've been thinking a lot about those courses. I've been thinking a lot about what I've learned about Russian history. I've been thinking a lot about all the Russian literature I've read. and try to understand better, the some of the cultural influences, that are driving the war that are occurring, within the Russian, kind of culture and the sort of political history of Russia. So that's what I would say is I've been thinking a lot about the classes I took way back when I was an undergraduate in college.
Yeah. Okay. That's certainly an interesting class. And yeah, like you were saying, it kind of helps you to get some more perspective as to what's going on in the world right now. And yeah, kind of on topic.
It's back to that point about why is this happening? It's like
exactly.
a little bit. I made that connect when you said that, Lu. I made the connection. It is kind of helping. Like, why is this happening? What's going on at a deeper level? Like, why is this? Why is this war happening? So anyway, so that's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I was about to say it came right back to that recommendation that you made, and it's so relatable. But yeah, I think we could all use some more of that, dig deep thinking, even if we didn't get to study a certain course back in the day. It's the time is now, right? You can always pick up a course or pick up something new to learn.
Absolutely.
To understand why something is happening. Yeah, pick up a book. That's right. Totally.
Exactly.
And so today we are going to talk about, the autonomy mindset, or, in shorter terms, agency, as you call it. It's kind of a big topic, but in the context of well-being, obviously, we want to focus on how that's going to relate to, our well-being, how we're going to sort of manage and carry ourselves throughout the day. So before we go into that particular bit of the conversation, which I'm sure will be very interesting, let's talk about well-being. How do you personally define well-being, Paul?
Well, I define well-being as to what extent are we able to express our agency in the world, which what I mean by that is, are we able to make positive progress in terms of moving our lives forward and creating lives that we most want to live? And so when that gets blocked, when we feel thwarted or hopeless or stuck, or anything is getting in the way, our well-being declines. So I define well-being as when we're in physical and mental balance as people, which enables us to access our agency. So our ability to direct our lives, to make good choices, and to put those choices into action. So when we're sort of at our best, when we are truly in a state of well-being, we have access to that power, that personal power. So I don't, but it does require us to be more in balance, right? If you're super depressed, super angry, super exhausted, which means, your body is not, you're not in balance. You're not going to have full access to your agency, your power, and your well-being is going to decline. So I look at well-being as really kind of being related to, are we in balance, and do we feel we have full access to our power as people?
Yeah, that is definitely a new definition on this show, because a lot of the times when we talk about well-being on the show, we talk about physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, and all those different aspects. But when you mention the power of agency in our well-being, I think that is so true, because when you really think about it, if we're not in alignment with ourselves, our well-being will definitely just fall out of whack. It will be it will still be there, because well-being does not disappear, but obviously it's going to be a lower level of well-being, and sometimes we don't realize it. A lot of the times, and this goes straight back to conversations I've had with a lot of my friends recently, where we kind of feel like we're on autopilot sometimes. And that is probably the complete opposite of the autonomy or the agency that we were talking about. And the circumstance matters, what's going on in our lives matter. It's not just up to us alone, but I think we can totally make the decisions to change or shift things around when things don't go as planned, or when things are really impacting our well-being, which is actually, quite true, because if we're just in the back seat, then our well-being level is definitely going to be lower. And I guess this is something that a lot of people are kind of saying, oh, like this is happening in my life and it sucks and it's horrible and my well-being is just not great, and they don't do anything about it. And that, I think that's where this topic would be super helpful, because I guess as humans we could all agree that we all go through different things in lives, and not everything will work out as planned most of the time. So what do we do about it to make sure that our well-being is there and it can stay balanced, or it can even be improved? So yeah, I really like that definition that you make. And since you've worked with a lot of people, I wonder what you notice to be some of the biggest misconceptions that they have when it comes to well-being.
I think some of the biggest misconceptions are that, that well-being means that you should be happy all the time, or feel satisfied all the time, or that well-being is attached to achievement, that you only have well-being if you are meeting your achievement goals. So I think that life has many twists and turns, right? There are things that we face as humans that we control, that we have a lot of control over. There's certain things that happen we have much less control over. So we're constantly in trying to adapt to things. And when we're in a state of well-being, it helps us to adapt. It helps us to roll with things, to make sense of things as they're happening and make good choices for ourselves. So some of the misconceptions about well-being is, I want to be completely in a stress-free zone and happy all the time. And that's not really, so well-being doesn't, in my mind, imply that you should be happy every minute, or that you should have no stress in your life, and that nothing should affect you. So that's a big misconception. The other thing about well-being is, people who see it as an end in itself, as an achievement, right? So they're seeking perfection. I want to get to a perfect state of well-being, so that becomes, yet another thing they get perfectionistic about. I think that can be a dead end. And sometimes people connect it to materialism. If I have more money and more things, I will, by definition, have more well-being. And that's completely not true either. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what well-being actually means, in my view. So good question.
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. And some of those misconceptions have been addressed on this show before. Some are kind of, new areas that we probably haven't dug deeper into. But I think today we're talking about, autonomy mindset, right? And I think it's interesting because on the one hand, you're kind of saying, like when you have that sense of agency, that's when you kind of have your sense of well-being. You can drive your well-being towards where you want it to be. And then at the same time, we were kind of saying, what, it's not always going to be sunshine, rainbow all the time. There are going to be lots of ups and downs, and it's actually up to you to kind of have that knowledge. And also going right back to the definition, the autonomy or the agency to actually make things happen or shift things around, because we can sit in the hurt, the pain, or the state of feeling complete chaos and having no sense of well-being at all and just let it be, or we can choose to change things around and make things better. It's always a choice, and we have that power. So first and foremost, I know we're kind of talking about autonomy mindset and agency, but let's define it first. And I know the original question was, how do you define autonomy mindset? But I wonder if there's any nuance or differences between that particular concept of autonomy mindset and the agency that you're talking about. Are the terms interchangeable? Are they the same? Or perhaps is there a little bit of difference here and there when we actually talk about them?
No, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked, because no, they're not exactly the same thing, and they really can't be used interchangeably, but they are related. The two concepts are clearly related. But, you know, autonomy is, you know, our ability to be independent, to, you know, kind of carve our own path. And so it's, you know, autonomy I see as being much more related to self-reliance, to being, you know, personally very resourceful. Agency is different. Agency is more all-encompassing. It's broader. So autonomy is an aspect of agency. At times, you know, we really need to operate autonomously. We need to have, you know, we need to trust ourselves. We need to have confidence in ourselves, you know, to act independently at times, you know, as to fully express our agency, our power in the world. But there are many times when agency requires us to connect with other people and to learn from other people, to get support from other people, and to operate, you know, in conjunction with other people. So not autonomously. So that's where there's, you know, they're related, agency and autonomy. But you know, agency, again, I would say is broader than autonomy, because there are times when clearly we're not fully autonomous, when we, you know, we need to cooperate, we need to operate, you know, less independently and in conjunction with other people. But then there are those times, as I mentioned, where we do need to take independent action and be autonomous. So, you know, so in other words, you know, no one can be autonomous all the time, right? It's just, that wouldn't work. You know, we are social creatures as human beings, right? We're embedded in social situations and in the cultures we grew up in, and all that's good. That actually helps us. It helps us to access our personal power, provided, you know, we're doing it in the right way. So does that answer the question? Do you think I made that clear?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear, and perhaps we can touch on agency a bit more now, because clearly, you know, the topic that we promised the audience was about autonomy mindset. But I'm curious about agency, because you said autonomy is sort of an aspect of agency, and it's so much of your work. So I don't think it would do justice if we just ignore it and not talk about it at all. So with that, what are some of the other aspects of agency, you know, beside the autonomy mindset that we just talked about?
Yeah, no, great question. And, you know, I think agency is, you know, at the most fundamental level, it's our ability to make good choices and put those choices into action. So fundamentally, that's what agency is. It means that it relates to something you said a moment ago, Lu, when you said we always have a choice. So agency as a concept implies that no matter how dire the situation we happen to be in, no matter how limited our options may be, there is still a choice. There's still almost always something that we can do or choose to do in terms of how we're going to act and respond. So with that in mind, as humans, the idea with agency is that, you know, when we make good choices for ourselves and put those choices into action, we create positive things in the world and positive things in our own lives. And so that fundamentally is what agency is about. It's about how do we as people become better at making choices and, you know, good choices, and also how do we get better at acting on, you know, putting those choices into effect, right? Into making those things happen in our lives. So there's a lot. Agency is a lot. I mean, as I said, it's a big topic.
It is.
And there are many things that need to be in place kind of foundationally for us as people to fully access our agency, our power. And autonomy is one of them. I mean, at times we really do need to take an independent stand, take independent action, you know, think more autonomously, act more autonomously, but not all the time.
Yeah.
So that's where they're very much sort of related. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, agency is really it's essentially about how we as people kind of create the lives we have as individuals, but also how we as people create the societies we live in. And in effect, the entire world we live in is it's all a function of our agency as humans.
Yeah, definitely. Well, since agency is such a big topic and it sounds like we should all benefit from it and we can all benefit from it when we understand how to harness its power. And you mentioned that autonomy is one of the, let's say, key anchors to it. Let's dig deeper into autonomy because that's what we're here to talk about. So, I saw that our research team kind of mentioned autonomy appears a psychological need. Apologies, tongue twister. Autonomy appears as a psychological need in our lives. So, why is that? And how does it impact our well being?
Well, people want to feel in control of their lives, right? I mean, you want to feel like you can be the director in your own life, right? That if your life is a movie, that you're actually the director of that movie, right? You're making things happen. And so people want to feel that they're capable of adapting to the challenges they experience in their lives, and not only just adapt, but they also want to feel like they're able to thrive, right? To kind of be creative and build a meaningful life. And so there's a psychological need, I would argue, that we all have to feel like we can do that we actually have the ability to do that. And when that's blocked, when we don't feel that, when we feel like we can't, for whatever reason, in terms, whatever is getting in the way, then we struggle, right? It becomes very difficult. And you mentioned when people feel stuck or they feel like they're just being carried along on automatic pilot and they're not directing things. They're not in control, or that produces can produce anxiety, right? It can make the person feel kind of worried and feel like, oh no, what's happening? Like why am I feeling like I'm not really directing the course of events in my life? Why is this happening? So I would argue there's a deep psychological need for us as people to feel like we have some measure of power and control in directing our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a great point. And I like the analogy of, if your life's a movie, you're the director. That's really cool because when you think about it that way, it's probably going to be a little bit more fun for people because sometimes I think, especially as adults, when it comes to life, people kind of like, oh, like I have to do all of these adulting things, and like I'm in control now, I'm in charge now, which can be kind of scary actually. So yes, being autonomous is a psychological need. It's very important that we are in control, but it can also be scared because the good news is you're in control and the bad news is you're in control. So, you know, um, I think that's where we kind of need to learn to how to do it in the first place. Because, I think for a lot of people who are in transition, let's say kids who start to go to college and start to be by themselves for the first time. I have a friend like that who recently started to adult on her own, and she's kind of like, oh, it's kind of fun. But then at a certain point, she's like, oh, but it's kind of different too, because like now I have to do everything. I'm like, yeah, welcome to the adult life. And then there's another friend who used to just sort of live alone, live with other people, and then she started to not live alone, but start to get her own place so that she can take care of her little brother. And that's also like another experience, a whole different kind of like living. And yeah, she was talking to me. She's like, "Oh, this is really good, but it's also kind of weird, you know." And I'm like, "Again, welcome to the adult life. It's gonna be fun." And so how can we feel autonomous in that sense? Because it can be really good, but it can also be kind of intimidating when we start, or along the way sometimes we kind of want to give up because we're like, oh, can someone just take charge because I'm too tired. So how can we feel that sense of autonomy, but in a positive way, where we feel like we are in charge, we're taking control, and it's not in the sense that we have to, but we can enjoy that journey a bit more because it's related directly to our well-being, right? So I think anything that we do, sure, like we can do it, but if we can find a way to truly enjoy it and embrace it, it'll be so much better for our well-being.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think that to answer the question, I think when people take on challenges, right, when they move from being, from childhood to adulthood, and, the biggest change there is, adults are responsible. They become responsible for themselves versus, when we're children and we have parents, or, whoever's raising us, they are there to be responsible parties to help us with everything. So not that they go away and you can't get help, when you become an adult, but, it is, you take on more responsibility. And I think that what I would advise people to do is to recognize it's a journey and that it involves learning, that you need to look at it as a learning experience, right? That something you'll learn through doing, and that you need to consider that that it will involve a certain amount of trial and error. You'll try this, you'll see how it works. You'll try that, you'll see how that works. So I think if people can acknowledge, hey, this is a big challenge for me. It feels rather uncomfortable, but sort of just try to break it down into certain tasks and realize this is a learning experience for me. I'm going to be learning and growing. And when we are in a mode where we're doing a lot of growing, a lot of learning and growing as people, it can be uncomfortable at times. We can feel full of doubt at times. So I think you need to explain to people that's okay. That's normal. That's a normal part of growing and learning.
Yeah.
So don't think something's wrong, right? Because you aren't sure what to do next. I would also say, everyone needs a support system. So I don't want people to think that autonomy means that you have to figure everything out on your own and do everything on your own. No, I think you need to express your autonomy. You need to have, a network of people that you can get support from. You can rely on people who actually maybe know more than you do about a certain topic.
Yeah.
And you can call them up. You can have coffee with them. You can chat with them about, so tell me about this and this, because I'm trying to learn about this. I don't know much about it. And I know you know a lot more than I do. So you need to have people around you to help you to gain more autonomy. So in other words, you just don't arrive at autonomy and, because you suddenly, you're 20 years old, right? It doesn't happen that way. It's a journey. You learn as you go.
Yeah.
But you do need a social network to help you along the way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's kind of like me adulting as well, because I think because I moved countries, 5-6 years ago when I started my adulting journey, in air quote, I moved country, and for the first time I don't have family around me, and then I was kind of like, so what do I do now? And it's really hard for me to ask for help. Now, don't ask me why. This goes way back. It'll take therapy for me to understand. But I find it extremely hard to ask for help. And I enjoy autonomy. Like I love being autonomous. But then there was something that was kind of missing because I was kind of thinking, I'll do everything by myself. However, it doesn't work that way. The first time I moved house, somebody helped me. Now I cannot remember who helped me back in the day, but they offered the help and it was me who was hesitant to take it. But then I realized that, me taking the help does not mean that I'm not being autonomous. They're just things that I need help with. And I cannot physically
Absolutely.
do that by myself. Yeah.
No, that's a really important point. And what you did there in this example you just shared is you reframed it.
Mm-hmm.
You reframed the whole thing. So perhaps you were looking at getting help from someone as being implying that you were dependent or that you couldn't do something for yourself. But in fact, if you reframe it, which you just did, to look at it from the standpoint of you are just seeking out someone and getting their perspective, asking for their thoughts, their ideas, their perspective, you then get to choose whether you accept that, whether you utilize that they've shared with you or not. So you're still always in autonomy mode and exercising your autonomy, but you actually are, gathering information and knowledge, right? And so to that extent, you're much more powerful, and are able to be more autonomous because, you have access to all this really important information that you need.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people, dependency is seen by people as a bad thing, right? Like, oh no, I want to do this all by myself on my own. I don't want to feel dependent on anyone else. And I think that is, that can be a very self-limiting approach, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not that you can't get there doing it all completely on your own, but it may take you much, much, much longer and be much harder than if you actually, develop a network of people that support you and you can learn from.
Yeah,
so,
totally. There are caveats to it for sure. And I think one more thing that is important is we can look at the complete opposite example where, maybe someone does not know how to do anything by themselves. And for the first time, like you said, it's a journey, yes, and they have to go through trial and error. And I think I like to see it as experiential learning, but still for some people it can be intimidating and daunting. And I can share some examples, not just, young adults, but, let's say people who are so used to being in a relationship and they're so used to doing everything together. And now they get out of that and they don't know who they are. It's kind of like going back to that Ken and Barbie example, like I'm Ken, I'm supposed to be with you. And there's really no autonomy in that scenario where it's kind of like, oh, it's your life, you take charge of it. It's not that you are part of this like duo, whatever that might be. And so for a lot of people, it takes learning, So on the one hand, there are people probably like me who just do not like to ask for help or find it hard to accept help from others because I like to do things myself. And then on the other hand, there are also people who are so used to doing things together with other people that they find it really, really hard, extremely hard to do things by themselves. So for those people, how can they get started and how can they start to feel autonomous? Because it can be daunting. For younger people, it might be easier, but for the older people, it might be kind of like it's actually really hard because you have to unlearn a lot.
Well, I would advise people like that. First of all, it helps if they are really able to see that and acknowledge it. So what you just shared, if they're able to notice that for themselves and say, I all too often don't speak up. I just go along with what everybody else is saying or doing. If they're able to notice that, and also if they're able to talk about how it makes them feel, as they notice that, like why, and also understand why they do that. Why do they not, voice their thoughts or feelings, at times when they could. So, there's exploration involved in, again, we're back to that whole thing of why is this happening? Why do I do this? And I think if people can understand why they, a little bit, have a little insight into why they do it,
Totally.
that does help a bit. Because they can say, well, I do it because I'm afraid if I say something that's really different from what everybody else is saying, that people won't like me, or they won't accept me, or they will look at me like there's something wrong with me, or it will derail the whole process. And who knows what, people can have irrational fears about things. But I think so there's the insight piece to try to understand why is this happening. The second piece is putting some new practices, some new habits into place. So I would advise someone like that, why don't you just focus on trying to speak up a little bit more, just one time, right? Voice your thoughts, voice your concerns, voice, your opinion, to just hear yourself speak up at times. And, but to do that, you need an independent point of view. So sometimes, people like that need to actually take a little more time to really think about how they really feel and what they really think. Because sometimes there are a lot of people, believe it or not, who just outsource all of their thinking to other people. They don't think independently. They almost in some ways don't have an independent point of view. And I would say, that's something you should try to develop. Everyone should try to develop their own point of view. And, through thinking and reflecting and reading and, but what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? And if someone has a really hard time describing that or stating what they think, or they don't know what they think, that means there's some work they need to do to try to, draw themselves out more and let themselves arrive at a point of view on things, and then work on having a little more confidence in voicing those concerns. So, again, some people are too much the opposite end of the extreme, right? They are constantly voicing their opinions. They're very domineering, highly opinionated. They rub people the wrong way because they're too much. And then on the other extreme that we're talking about are people who just, sort of go along to get along, right? And that's the other extreme, which that's not good. That's not good either.
Yeah, so true. It's a sweet spot we need to find. I think.
Yeah, it's a balance. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's not easy, but that's why it's fun, because you get to learn. This is like a new challenge to take on. Now there's another aspect to this that I would love to hear your perspective on. Now this is related to culture, because I think with my cultural background and with the history of how things are carried down in my family, for example, I feel the need to do everything by myself. And I enjoy that autonomy. For other people in other kinds of culture, maybe it's different. And we already covered, like how they can deal with this. But what is the role of culture in this? Because on the one hand, we have the individual who understands what's going on in their culture and can work on it. And on the other hand, we have the culture that's also going to keep influencing them. So it's kind of like this continual relationship we have to look out for, right? Because let's say the local area we live in, the cultural background we have, everything is so super interconnected to how we carry ourselves and how we manage our own autonomy. So what is that relationship and what is that role of culture?
Well, it's huge. It determines a lot. We're all embedded in various cultures that we're part of, right? In various social structures and relationships we have. So culture determines a lot. And, the autonomy varies considerably from one culture to another. I mean, some cultures prize autonomy and value it so much that they try to create, enormous amounts of it. Other cultures, it's not something that they value highly. They actually value more people being connected, to family members, for example.
Yeah.
So it has a lot to do with also the strength of communities, and certain cultures again prize the connection between family members and the strength of the bonds that exist within a community, whereas other cultures are much less so. The United States, for example, really is a culture that prizes independence and autonomy to a very large degree. And some have argued that it's too extreme in the United States and the United States culture. That and so we have a lot of issues here where people are isolated, issues where there's loneliness, issues where people feel a lot of despair, right? They kind of don't have access to their agency because they're so disconnected. You get people, a lot of people, you get a number of people using drugs and the so-called deaths of despair that is being written about in the U.S. So you can, again, we're back to what you mentioned, Lu, about balance. Ideally there's a balance between independence, autonomy, and versus connection and responsibility to the community of other people. So, but anyways, it's the role of culture. To answer your question really simply, it's huge. It determines so much of our relationship to its autonomy.
Yeah. And that reminds me of what you mentioned earlier, Paul, about the podcast and the whole concept of why is this happening. And I guess, when we really think about ourselves that way, if this is the movie, why is it happening that way, right? We got to look at the backstory. And culture is one of those aspects, and understanding our own culture, our cultural background, how our culture has shaped us, is extremely important in this sense, because if we don't understand why, it's going to be really hard to change, whether it be, you want to be a little bit more autonomous, or you would like to be autonomous just enough, and not so much that you distance yourself from everybody else. I think it takes understanding your culture, your background, and goes back to all of that. So when we have a sense of autonomy, obviously everything is great, and we can do a lot of things for ourselves, and we want to have that sense of control in our lives. As you mentioned earlier, it's very basic. But what about a lack of a sense of autonomy? I don't think we've covered that. What would happen if someone does not have a sense of autonomy at all?
Well, I think if we see someone who has very little autonomy, it could be considered actually, a disorder, right? I mean, there in the U.S. and in psychology, we have a disorder called the dependent personality disorder, and that's where a person is just so dependent on other people that they have very little to no autonomy. So you can see that happening in relationships, in abusive relationships, where a person is living with a spouse, or partner who is very abusive, and we often ask for people who, like you, who have a healthy sense of autonomy. You ask the question, why is that person staying in that relationship? Well, because they've grown highly dependent and they don't have a sense of autonomy. So I think that extreme cases of a lack of autonomy can lead to very unhealthy consequences, really bad outcomes. But it also, a lack of autonomy can also just lead to not living an authentic life. I mean, you talked about people feeling like they're just being carried along. They're not really directing the events in their lives. They're not perhaps making some of the choices, the bolder choices in their lives that they could make. So, ultimately, people without autonomy can end up living someone else's life, like somebody else's dream. And, again, the goal for all of us is to live a life that's consistent with our values and our interests, and to create something positive in this world, through expressing, our values and, and exploring our interests. So when that's blocked, when people don't have the autonomy to do those things, it's, they're not living authentic lives, and they're not being creative. They're not having imaginative, interesting lives. And, I remember from it was a TV series. I can't remember what series it was, but there was a line from it. It might have been a movie. I can't even remember what it was from, but someone said, well, if you're not going to live your life, who's going to live your life? Who's going to live your life? Right? If you're trying to live somebody else's life, somebody else's like dreams or hopes, but they're, you're not living yours, who's going to live your life? And so it's really, sometimes a wake up call for people, because, it's, a lot of times people think, oh, I just don't want to take any big actions. I don't want to disrupt things. I'm nervous. I'm worried. And so, I think sometimes people don't realize that, there's a lot of things they can do to act in their lives that help them create a life that, and then that momentum carries on, right? Sometimes it takes one bold action, one bold decision, and that creates something else and something else. And, they end up creating a whole new life for themselves that becomes very meaningful. And, but, anyway, it does relate to resiliency, because I think there's a lot of people who, they want to try to play it really safe. They don't want to take any risk, because risk makes them anxious and worried. And so, if they feel like if they just keep going along very with the flow, that's the safe thing to do. But really, that's not so safe, because the reality is they could end up, if they keep doing that over too long a period of time, not living their life, not living, the life they could live or should probably live, that's, based on who they are. So anyways, lack of autonomy can over a long haul have a lot of negative consequences.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think it's kind of hard for some to understand that they are not in charge or they're not in control, because, the quote that you mentioned from that movie or that TV series hit home really hard, because I'm sure quite a few people can relate with, oh, I'm doing this because my parents told me to do so. Oh, I'm doing this because my partner told me to do so. I'm doing this because my friends told me to do so. And so what exactly did you want to do? Had no one told you what to do, right? It's kind of like, it's a realization, and sometimes it takes years to realize, because, you kind of going with your days, and you hear advice from people, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm taking in all this information. I'm making decisions for myself. But are you really? So that's kind of, that's where it's really hard to distinguish between making the decision for yourself, being autonomous and doing things yourself, versus doing things yourself with the influence of others, and it's not really authentic. So not really living an authentic life. And I think the concept of living an authentic life and being your authentic self have emerged, it's been around a bit more recently, and I'm really glad that people have started to talk about it. So autonomy mindset clearly is so important for us to live that authentic life. So how can people start to develop this autonomy mindset, or work on it a bit further, because we all have our sense of autonomy. It's not that we don't have it. It's just maybe sometimes we need to nurture it a bit more. And for some people, it's starting from scratch. So how can we all do that?
It's a good question. I think that my suggestion here is for people to pause and reflect more on what they really are thinking and feeling. And what I mean by that is unplug, you know, get off of all your devices, just sit quietly and notice where your thoughts go, how are you feeling? Think about where your life is, what you'd like to change, and get quiet. Be quiet and reflective. I think a lot of people don't do that enough, and I think that interferes with them making these bolder choices and expressing their autonomy, and again, kind of creating these authentic lives. So, I think also questioning things more. I think when people have an autonomy mindset, they question not just why is this happening, which is always a good question, but they also question, the direction other people are moving in. Because one thing people often don't appreciate is that human beings are herd animals, right? We think of ourselves as, super special, top of the food chain. We don't think of ourselves as similar to, other animals on the planet. And we are in fact herd animals. We follow each other. I mean, so you can see this, with trends, right? We think about what's, what is sort of trending now. Well, a lot of that's herd instinct. It's like, oh, well, she's doing it and he's doing it, and well, I'm going to start doing that. Why not? And so you get a lot of people just following the herd. And I think to develop a good, true autonomy mindset, you have to question things more. You have to say, why would I follow that? Why would I get involved in that? Is that really for me? Is that really, does that really work for me, given my values and my interests? And so I think truly developing an autonomy mindset requires you to question things. I think it's also healthy. It helps in developing an autonomy mindset to be around similar people who do question things more, think about things more deeply, reflect on things a bit more. Because if you're around people who just all they do is follow the crowd and do what everyone else is doing, you're not going to learn. You're not going to learn very much from.
So true.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is so true. I think those are really great tips there, because I guess, especially in this day and age of social media too, you see a lot of information, and sometimes you don't have that filter turned on. Like, it's not like a website where you can just click the filter. Like, I want to see this and that. Your mind is different. It's cluttered with so many different things. And if you don't really stop to think or to apply the filter at all times, you unknowingly get influenced. And I think I'm going to have to do this work too, because I realized that maybe a lot of the choices that I made recently is because I've been influenced by things that I've seen or people that I've interacted with. And next part, we have the practice section where we get a bit more practical, but you kind of mentioned a few things that are practical already. Now, if you have something new that you can share with people to cultivate an autonomy mindset, or something you do personally, that'll be great. Otherwise, we can just drill into one of the practices that you've already shared just now.
What I would share as a practice that I think helps a lot with cultivating autonomy is something I call positioning myself as a learner. And, to position yourself as a learner means that you sort of try and assess what you know, what you don't know. You also try to understand and define your assumptions, what assumptions you may have. So as humans, we're constantly faced with new situations that require us to make sense of. And, a lot of times we should be in learning mode. We should always position ourselves to learn. And a lot of times people don't do this. They assume they know more than they do. They don't ask enough questions. They rely more on their assumptions and their beliefs to kind of carry them forward. And so there's a missed opportunity to to really fully embrace their autonomy, because they're not really learning. I mean, they haven't really learned enough to kind of make the best choices for themselves. So one of the practices that I utilize a lot is, and I advise this to all the leaders I work with, and sometimes I work with leaders who are very smart people with a lot of experience. Sometimes they may be the most experienced or even the smartest person in the room, but I encourage them to position themselves as learners with other people. And so ask other people, what do they think? What do they see? What are they concerned about? Because invariably, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how much you know, you can always learn more. And so that's one habit or practice that I think really does build autonomy, is don't assume you know everything you need to know, and really actively position yourself to learn, through every day in your life as you go through your life. Ask people questions, draw them out, ask them to share what they see. You don't have to agree with it, and you may not, but I do think that that's a really good practice.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great practice. And, if someone was to position themselves as a learner, how often should they do this? Should they do this weekly?
Daily? I would say they should do it. I think they should do it daily. I think it should become a routine practice that they think about, especially when they're dealing with a more complicated situation. And they should ask themselves the question, what information do I need here? What do I need to learn? Where can I get that information or that learning from? Do I get it from a book? Do I get it from another person? And how do I make sure that my assumptions and any preconceived beliefs I have, how do I make sure those don't derail the process? Because we all operate largely, humans largely operate on assumptions and beliefs, and that can really get in our way.
Yeah, totally. Oh, what a great practice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now we are sort of almost done, but before we let you go, we have open mic. So as I said earlier to you, this is your forum to talk about anything that you would like to share with our audience that we might have not covered. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the topic, especially if you have other passions that you would like to share, or any projects that you are interested in, talking about today. So the floor is all yours, Paul. Go for it.
Yeah, what I would say is, I'm working on a project right now in terms of the Gen Z population, and as they transition into adulthood and into work, what are some of the obstacles they face, challenges they face? What do organizations need to know about how best to facilitate this generation coming into the workforce so that they can make a contribution? And what does Gen Z as a population group, what do they need to develop more of in order to, like you said, Lu, at the beginning of our session today, to become responsible adults, to basically gain access to their agency, and become more autonomous. So I'm working on that project. I'm just starting it, and I'm very excited about it. I'll be interviewing a lot of people, and learning more about what are some of the specific challenges that this generation is experiencing as they enter the workforce, and what would help them to be more successful.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's an
Yeah,
interesting
absolutely.
project. I'm keen to find out more about the results because,
Yeah,
Gen Z is definitely a different generation, very different from the previous ones. And I wonder how they think, how they function, and how they are going to work in the future. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a different kinds of lives that they're going to have, and also different kinds of workforce because there are so many new jobs that they've sort of just created, you know?
absolutely. No, it's a really good
Yeah.
point. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of jobs that they're actually going to haven't even been created yet, right? I mean, there's
Yeah, exactly. And that
new
too.
jobs being created all the time.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. Well, thank you so much for being here, Paul. And for our audience who would like to find out more about your work, where should they go?
The best place for them to go, the easiest place for them to go is to powerofagency.com. There's a website that has information on the concept of agency, also information on the book that I co-wrote. And I would encourage them to your audience to look more into how to develop greater agency in their lives, because again, it really does relate directly to the capacity to kind of create a life on your own terms, which is
Yeah.
what we're really all trying to do. It's again, live our own most authentic life, and create a life on our terms.
Yeah.
So so go to the website powerofagency.com and drop me a line. Let me know what you think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think it's been a really eye-opening conversation, with great reminders. And I hope that our audience will walk away with at least one new thing today, which is to learn every day and to reevaluate why they think what they're thinking.
Good. I hope so. Thanks so much for having me, Lu. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm glad. You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.